is a piece called Summoning by our host here today, Piawat. Throughout this piece, throughout the piece, Piawat took advantage of one of the main things about the Hichiriki. One of the best things about it is its flexibility. I can't play and hold this at the same time. So the Hichiriki with the glissandos and the pitch changes, which can just be done with the lips. So tell me about the piece.
First of all, thank you very much for playing my piece beautifully. Very formal. Okay, so the piece called Summoning. So like it's like more like calling, right? Like calling, it's just to say to someone, just, you know, go. So like it's a kind of like poetic, but in terms of technical aspect, I was thinking a lot with, you know, one gesture, like when like do one. Actually, it happens in many of my works. You know, when I work on pieces with tubes, there's a lot of like a lot of like kind of rotation, the circular motion. I found that this sound, this gesture, has a lot of potentialities, like to create, you know, sound. It's like to create like different musical parameters, right? Like the circular motion, it could apply with, like, you know, different dynamics, different repetition, it's very versatile for me, and I think it's a very interesting gesture, and also like go back to the idea of poetic, like summoning. It's like, and you said to me too that you always use this piece to be the introduction of your concert, right? Like you always put it in the first space, first spot, and then calling someone to see your concert. So.
Yeah, I started using this in a lot of my concerts. Sometimes you'll hear the ring, you know, for the audience to come in, or the lights. Often I tell the stage managers, don't worry about that. I have a piece that will call the people in. And they can be standing there talking or already sitting, lights go down, and then there's this sound, and it brings people into this sound world. Yep, so thank you for the piece.
Thank you very much for playing.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a bit today about some of the techniques, the old techniques, some of the new techniques, and I'll play some of the other pieces that demonstrate. As you can see, Hichiriki, very small, ancient Japanese traditional instrument. And up until recently, like maybe 20 years ago, it was only used in gagaku, the traditional Japanese music. And actually, Alan Havanis had written a piece for it many years ago, but almost nothing for contemporary. My colleague and former teacher, Hitami Nakamura, in Japan started having people write pieces for it. I started playing about 7 or 8 years ago, started having people play pieces for it, so it can bring this instrument and the sound of the instrument into the contemporary world. And I think even though the range is a bit limited, so about an F up to a B or C, and so that's limited, but the expressive qualities and all the different techniques within that small range make it a really incredible instrument for contemporary music. And I've had pieces that are just for Hichiriki and piano, which isn't so easy. You have to, as a composer, you really have to think about how the Hichiriki, with its flexible sound. So if the piano has a C and I'm supposed to go, to try to match those pitches, but it can be done well. Hichiriki and Kugo, several pieces, which is an ancient Japanese harp. Hichiriki and Uteki. And tomorrow night, the chamber version, Hichiriki Concerto, one of the only 2 in the world for Hichiriki and Western strings. Some of the traditional sounds and the terms for them that often the contemporary composers who write people use those terms, because one is called usu, which is sort of like a tenuto, it's Western, closest Western counterpoint to it. But they will use the Japanese term, so if they put usu, and that's just, it can be done with the diaphragm or your mouth, and that's called usu. Another popular one is Tataku, which is tap. So here we go. And some composers will write it out as a grace note if they specifically want a grace note. I often have to ask the composers, do you want it to be slow or fast? I mean, that's, the tataku is usually fast. If I see a grace note, I start thinking, so not as fast. Then the mawasu, which is using the two notes that uses two holes. So if you go, which in gagaku you will hear that sort of phrase. And then the one that is the most prevalent is called enbai, which some composers who know what this is, they will have a note, and the next note that they want me to land on, and it can be higher or lower, and usually the enbai is the pitch going up above the note, then back down, and then back up. It can also just be going up. It can come above. Some composers will just write it out, exactly what they want. Some will just write the two notes and write enbai and leave it up to me. And then I will have to ask them, like, how much do you want? So, example of that. And it can also be fast. It can also be done, that was a combination of fingers and embouchure. It can also be done just with the lips. Depending on what sound you want, whether you want the sound to be manipulated with your fingers or the lip or combination. Now in the last 10 or 15 years, Nakamura-san and I have been trying to get composers to write us pieces, and we've had quite a few. And adding things, in gagaku, you never, ever use your tongue. So as a clarinet player, I was thrilled that I don't have to work on articulation. However, now some composers are writing tonguing. It's not so easy. The sound is very different. The concerto tomorrow night, he has me playing the same thing two different ways. One is tongued and one isn't because the sound is different. It's like, and that was just with air, then, and I don't know if the audience hears the difference. I hear the difference up close and I feel it because touching it. Flutter tonguing. Is used quite well and is actually easy. And also singing while you're playing. That's not my most favorite sound, so don't write me a piece that has all of that in it. Last year, a composer heard that and then wrote me a piece for Hichiriki in voice and other player alto flute and voice. It was 8 minutes, and we sang and played the whole 8 minutes. And we were rather two unhappy performers for those 8 minutes in our rehearsals. Tremolo, which is not used in gagaku, but is just very good. And you can do it, again, changing the pitches with just the finger, but going down. So there, that's a good one. Glissando is the easiest one, of course. And then the Disparagliondo, of course. So those, we have occasionally by mistake been able to play a multiphonic. It's not very easy to do. If a composer writes it in a piece, there is no control over the pitch. Like a multiphonic in clarinet, you can figure out what the pitch is. I won't do it because this is a good read. You have to put it in your mouth. You have to put your teeth on it. Probably what? Almost, but not quite. So Hitame and I have been working on that, trying to figure out how to get some harmonics on it. We don't know if the instrument is going to be able to do that. I'd like to play a piece by David Loeb, and he uses his notation. He has the main notes, and then he just has his lines. He's based in New York half the year for like 50 years. He spends in Japan, has written a lot of music for Japanese instruments, understands them, and so he usually just writes the line that he wants. This piece he did put in some tremolos and some grace notes to differentiate what he wanted for a more traditional Japanese sound, or what we call, he says, put in your gagaku influences, and then where he wanted Western stuff. So this is Deep Mist, Shinro by David Loeb. So that used just about all of those techniques that we were talking about, except tonguing. Do any of you here have questions?
Me คำถามไหม
yeah, okay.
I can translate.
Okay. Yeah. You have any questions?
No, I was asking them like if they have any question. I have, of course, but maybe like let the.
And these are all composers, right?
Yes.
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 Yeah. So, any questions about the Hichiriki? Yes.
Oh, please.
How is the
How's the differentiation between clarinet and Hichiriki when you tongue?
I'm doing it the same because I play clarinet also, and I'm tonguing it. I'm not tonguing it on the tip, but just behind it. I mean, right here, it's a double reed instrument, and sort of tonguing it right on the bottom here of the tube. Yeah, just right here. Yeah, to stop the vibration from it. Not really. You mean as far as playing or tonguing? Not really. I mean, it's much more flexible. I mean, with the pitch and everything. But no, as far as how you approach it, and even though it's called a double reed, it's actually a single reed that's pulled up and cut from just one specific place outside of Kyoto, and it's called a reed. And it's round and it's cut, and then through a very hot iron and very slow, one end is pressed very slowly. So instead of it being round, you end up with this, and you shave it down so it'll vibrate. So it looks like of course there are two vibrating parts, but it is one single piece of reed that's been flattened at one end. The basic difference, especially with Hichiriki and Gagaku, is it is a big full sound at all the time. There's a bit of, at the beginning of a lot of notes, the most famous Gagaku piece is Etenrak, and it begins no tapering at the end of a phrase. When I first started playing Gagaku in the lessons, and I would want to taper, because I thought that sounded nice, and it's what I'm used to. And she's like, no, that's Western thinking, and especially in Gagaku, the Hichiriki, it is just out there. I don't want to say that it's loud because that's kind of a crude term, but it is the main melody instrument in Gagaku, and it is out there. Occasionally, there's a thing called netori, which is at the beginning of each of the pieces, and it's their tuning note. And that will end and that will fade out a little bit, not to niente, but will fade out just a little bit, tuning into the show, which has the tuning note. So the sound is much bigger. And this, especially the piece that just played David Loeb, there's a lot of decrescendos. For contemporary pieces that have soft spots in it, I need to make a different reed. The one that I use for Gagaku is a much stronger reed, and it just plays loud. It is much harder to get soft on those reeds, so I have to make a reed where I can have the dynamic variation. This reed will not play quite as loud as my Gagaku reeds, but it doesn't need to because it's quite loud anyway. And there was every year at Columbia University, there's a symposium about Japanese traditional music. And there is a person who gives this introductory speech every year. And every year she would say, the Hichiriki can't play soft. And I would be, yeah, okay, it doesn't. And I would be a little offended, and I would tease her about it. And she's like, no, it can't. So fine, we did John Cage's Yoanj, and the three Hichiriki players, for three Hichiriki and percussion, said, let's make sure that it's someplace we play super soft. So, there's all these sighing sounds. And to her credit, she came up after the concert, gave me a big hug, and congratulated that it was the first time she had heard a Hichiriki. And she's lived in Tokyo for like 30 years. So I was proud and glad that yes, the Hichiriki can play soft, although it is thought of as a loud instrument. Yeah. Any other questions? I can't quite hear you, I'm sorry.
I think he means about the tradition
Right.
of the performative way.
Yeah.
Like how like sometimes he knows some about the Japanese has some kind of free interpretation,
Right.
or is that like less?
Yeah. For Gagaku, there is a traditional sound. I don't want to say that there's no freedom, but there is very little. You spend a lot of time with your teacher, and up until maybe 100 years ago, there was no notation for Gagaku. It was only brought down, and that's how I have studied Gagaku in Japan. The teacher sits across from me, and we sing the notes, the shoga. Then she sings it, then I sing it. Then we sing it and she fingers it and I watch her, and then we do it together, and then it's my turn. And then she plays it and I finger it, we play it together, then I play it by myself, and this can be like what we would call like 2 bars or a 1 bar phrase or a half of a phrase, and then she sits there and I have to play it by myself. And just to get that 1 bar or 2 bars, it can take an hour. And especially with the notation, and we don't use notation at all. The notation tells you maybe 70% of what is going to be, what needs to be there. Like the beginning of Eiten Raka. The notation is so none of the slides are there. That's what you learn from your teacher, who learned from the teacher that's been going on for 800, 1,000 years. So then you can go and play with any Gagaku group, And if you're going to play Bairo or Eitenra, you know what it's going to sound like. It can be slightly different tempos depending on the group, or the group will decide, okay, we need to do this one a little shorter, not the long version, or a little bit faster. But I've played somewhere those first notes, and if it starts out like that, you're like, okay, we know we're in for a very long one, and you need a lot of air. Of course, then with the contemporary stuff, I can do what I want to do. There is, I hesitate to what I say in public.
Go ahead.
There is a little bit of the traditionalist who maybe don't like it is their instrument to be used in contemporary music. Not that is not all or many, but there are traditionalists in Japan who do not approve of anyone playing this instrument because they consider it a gagaku instrument. I consider it an instrument that can be used for music. That's one reason I study gagaku, because I want to give that respect to that world. And also it helps inform what I do with the contemporary music. It's also easier if I'm talking to a composer and I ask them, they write something, depends on how much study they've done, or if they've listened to my audio or other people's audio, and I'll just ask them, well, how much gagaku inflection do you want, just to boil it down very shortly. And if they know, they go, oh, please put in as much as you want. Other composers want the sound of this instrument, but do not want any of the gagaku inflections. And then I'm thinking, sometimes I want to say, well then, have it played on an oboe. Chromatic stuff is not easy to do on this instrument. You're not going to get da 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 da. It's just not but some composers will try to write it. Also being very aware of what keys, if you want to think of keys. The lowest note is G. Some composer, and then the next two beats, they want it up a half step. That's not going to happen. I can't play in G and then switch to G flat unless I push it into my mouth. But it's very limited. So it's nice when a composer, most of the pieces I've played have been written for me, and so I've worked with the composer so we can discuss these issues of what's good and what's not good with the instrument.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I think we have very provocative conversation.
Yep.
One thing that I think right now is that when I compose for you, I think when I wrote, I thought that I was composing for you, but not for Hichiriki.
Ah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yes. It's more like a personal
Yep.
aspect, like when as a composer, to put our aesthetic into the piece, right? But at the same time, it's nice to it's nice. I think I would say it's appropriate to learn tradition, right?
Yes.
Like to know the fundamental.
Yes.
A lot of how to say techniques, also the patterns, of like the historical composers, or like even people before, like the instrumental maker actually,
Yeah.
right? Because like it's very important, like for the person who make this, and then you kind of inherit, right? Like this aspect, and I think it's very fascinating to, like before go beyond to somewhere, like we start to learn what it happened before, right? So this topic really provoked me because you know, in Thai music, like, we cannot do that. Like, we have to, you know, pray to the instrument, you know, and your teacher gonna scold at you, like, oh, no, you cannot, you have to play exact like this. You cannot, like, compose a new piece, you know, and why not? You know, like, as a, like, we are in the 21st century, right? And, you know, like, some people wrote an article said about, okay, Thai music has been, like, frozen, blah. But what I really want to ask you for now is that how you feel that contemporary aspect has been changed traditional music in Japan. I mean, let's say Japanese traditional instruments. Like, maybe you can share about how composer thinks right now. Like, what is really important to search for.
Yeah.
You know? So.
Yeah, like I said, with Hitami and myself, it's really only been 10, 15, 20 years that composers have. And often I find that when especially dealing with Japanese composers in Tokyo, they hear this, they've heard this instrument their whole life. They hear it in the temple, the shrine, especially Eitan-raku. And then they see it being used in contemporary music, and the sound, of course, I think is what excites composers, because it's very different from any other instrument. It's the good things about it that are so good. And I think it's nice for them that they feel this freedom, and then the last 10 or 15 years, more and more composers are using it. I'm not sure why the Hichiriki is so far behind with contemporary pieces. There are so many contemporary pieces written for the koto. It's very common. The shakuhachi, a traditional instrument, again, many, many contemporary pieces. The uteki and the Hichiriki much further behind with composers writing it. I do think some of it is that it is difficult for composers to write a good piece for these instruments because of its limitations. You can't think of it as a Western instrument because of its limitations. And I think as they have seen more and more people play it, and usually it is me and Hitami who are doing this, they feel, they know me and Hitami, so they, as you said, they write us the piece. The only pieces I played for Hichiriki were either written for Hitami or for myself, and these were composers I knew. I haven't gone to a store and bought a Hichiriki piece, because there are none. So yeah, they write it for us, and we happen to play this. Most of these composers at first knew me because I also play clarinet. But now it's nice to be working with composers who have no knowledge of my clarinet playing. They only know me as a Hichiriki player. And so they see that we're out there doing it, and I think Japanese composers, contemporary, classical, whatever, again, and especially in Japan, there's all these unspoken rules of what you can write, how you can write, but they see that we're out there, we're doing it. Neither Hitami and I are involved in the academic world, any of the universities. We do what we want, so we don't have bosses. We are our own bosses. So that is attractive to these composers, to discover this and to feel free to write this. In the West, in the US and Europe, the composers who write me these pieces, they have none of that because they haven't grown up with it. Usually it comes from hearing it, seeing a video, and they love the sound and they want to write me a piece, and that's where it goes from them. It is a different instrument for them to write for. Yeah.
Nice. So do you have?
I'm going to play one more piece, and again, this is by Sunao Isaji, Japanese composer. He also writes a lot of pieces for traditional Japanese instruments. And you can turn the page for me.
I was trying, you know.
Yeah.
We always go the same time.
Right. But this piece uses a lot of slipping and sliding around in the pictures. There's some improv in it. There's some stuff that sounds like an Irish tune. So it's actually a little difficult to play because you have all these different techniques in it, like an Irish whistle, and then an oboe, and then all these half steps, and then gagaku stuff, and trills and glissandos. Yeah. So when I get to here, I can slide up. Yeah. That was called Dancing Piper. So he wanted that feeling of the dancing piper and then all these other crazy things with it.
I like, I like that there's a lot of familiar sound. I call it like familiar, like something you heard before, something it's come from, nature, let's say, something come from, it could interpret like through like birds or water, jungle you go, and that's a lot of kind of recalling somehow, like to my ears. And then, especially in this composition, I feel like there's a lot of, not just only the melodic, harmonic, but also it's a kind of gestural communication, like a lot of, and then like just, I kind of like, it's for Hichiriki. somehow.
It would be difficult to play this not on the Hichiriki. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
So maybe we can, if you want to say something about tomorrow.
Yes. So tomorrow, I hope you tune in. Interesting story about the Hichiriki Concerto. Masato Goya. He wrote me, I think, the second piece that I was ever had written for me. And it was his first time. He's from Japan. He started writing like show tunes and stuff, and then contemporary classical. He'd never actually even heard the Hichiriki. And so he heard me play it, and he was interested. So he wrote me a piece for Hichiriki and piano. And he really studied the Hichiriki, what would work. We worked on it a lot. And it's called Toro Nagashi. And that is where in August the spirits come back from the other side, and they spend some time here, and then you say goodbye to them to go back to the other side. You light the lanterns and put it on the water. So he had the piano as two of the voices, and this sort of rolling water, and then some spirits, and then the Hichiriki just floating in and out of this spirit voice through it. And incredibly beautiful, and he did it so well. The only places where we had to be, well, I had to be in tune with the piano, were just a few points, and then at the very end, and the piano was playing some chords, and there's a D in there, and I just had to slide up to the D. But the way he wrote it, and all of his pieces for Hichiriki gives me a lot. He says, even though he'll write the D here, and it's for 3 bars, he says, you land on your D where you feel it sounds right. If you didn't know him and you played it, it would sound different. Then he wrote me another piece for Hichiriki and piano, a piece called 4 Seasons, and he wrote 2 of the seasons for Hichiriki and piano, 2 clarinet and piano. Then he wrote me a piece, Hichiriki and Kugo, the ancient Japanese harp, very, very beautiful. And again, where he really worked with both instruments, what works, what doesn't. Then a piece, then he wrote me a bass clarinet and string quartet piece. That wouldn't work on Hichiriki. And we wanted a concerto. So we went out and applied, and we got this very nice grant from New York State for him to write a Hichiriki concerto. And there's only one other one, and that was written for Hitami. Unfortunately, it's only been played once. It's a great piece. I don't know why it hasn't been played more. And so this is the first Hichiriki concerto written for a Western player. And again, he was mixing the sounds. He wanted to have this contrast with the strings being very, very Western, at least at the beginning of the piece. It's about the creation myth in Japan. And the Hichiriki again, and he does put it in the notes to the performer that I'm sort of floating above. There are some times when I have to line up exactly, but they are playing, pulsing along, and I play, and then they start coming into my world, the Hichiriki world, and you'll hear all these glissandos, and they're supposed to mimic that gagaku, the slides. And then I start playing things that sound rather Western for Hichiriki. And then we go back into this sort of combination of the 2 worlds, and then we end up in this, our own sound world at the end. So thank you, Masatora. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. And I hope you can come and listen to it. Very excited. And tomorrow will be the chamber version of it, with just string quintet. And it'll be the first time that any of us have heard it. So very excited about that. Yep.
Cool. So, thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing us today.
So get busy writing for the Hichiriki. We need more pieces.
Yes. So maybe we can say like the final words for this session. So if anyone from online, if you have any questions, just put in the YouTube comments or whatever, and then probably he comes. Right?
Yeah, right.
And maybe after this session, because we have so many composers here.
Yeah.
So if you have some time,
yeah.
this room is free until 6. So any ใครอยากเขียนให้เขาครับคือเขาเล่นอยู่แล้วถูกไหมฮะก็คือเป็นโอกาสเนาะก็คือใครอยากคุยกับเขาอยากจะชวนเขามาทำอะไรก็เต็มที่เลยครับวันนี้คือเอาไปเลย Okay, so
I'm here. Yes.
yeah, so I'm once again I
Yes.
always say good things about you. So
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, thank you very much so much.